I'm so happy to be here. I'm glad to see a lot of you as well. Well, to see all of you actually, but some of you that I recognize. I am so happy for this panel, Women's Voices in the Classroom. And I'm just going to briefly welcome Kaitlyn Russell, who I count as a close personal friend and colleague, who is irreplaceable in my affection and esteem. We'll have Kaitlyn come up to announce the topic of the panel and then the panel members as well. Thanks, Kaitlyn.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? This is made for tall people. Maybe? How about now? Okay, I have to be a lot closer to it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. I see some of my students here today. That's really exciting. So like Jeff said, I'm Kaitlyn Russell. I work here at the university full-time as an admissions counselor in diversity outreach. And I cover mostly adult learners. It's a big passion of mine, having been an adult learner myself for so many years. And then I also cover other categories of non-traditional students, for lack of a better term, like veterans, fully online students, and all the alternative high schools in the state of Utah. And I've recently become an adjunct professor here at the university as well in the philosophy department, which has been really fun. And I teach ethics and values, and I'm sure there's quite a few ethics and values students here today. And I bet you're getting extra credit for it, like my students will. So I'll start with a little bit of information and the inspiration for the panel today, which, as Jeff mentioned, is called Women's Voices, the Classroom Experience. And I don't know about you, but it's really refreshing for me to look at a table full of our female students here at UVU exclusively. So I was really excited to put this panel together. I'm very thankful Brian asked me to participate in this event, and so I just want to thank Jeff and Brian for allowing me to do this. I myself came to UVU as a non-traditional student out of the gate. I did my undergraduate here in the philosophy department with a minor in ethics. Yeah, and that's roughly it. I also have an associate's degree in humanities and social sciences, and I did both of those here. When I came here, I was an adult learner. I came with a prior failed college experience in tow, as I'm sure some people in the audience have as well. And therefore, I was self-conscious, I was afraid, I was essentially a stranger in a strange land, as I'd only lived in Utah about like a year or so, and I was coming from South Carolina, so it was very different. And I also was coming packing with like a lot of different naysayers that felt like I couldn't do this, and that I couldn't be a full-time student and work full-time at the same time. I'm sure a lot of us have to work because it's expensive to live here, so there was no way I could choose between the two, so I had to do both. And I chose UVU out of the many, many wonderful options we have here in Utah, mostly because of our dual mission and the diversity and the types of learners that we have here, as well as just the overall feeling that I got when I came here on a tour. I just remember when I toured all the schools in Utah, and when I came here, I felt like, the things they put on those billboards, maybe they're actually true and not just a gimmick to get me in the door. So I chose UVU, and I felt they had a place for me, and I feel that they still do, which is why I work here now in recruiting, and I can confidently tout our mission to every prospective student because I feel very passionately about what UVU has to offer. And so overall, my experience has been immensely positive as a student, as a staff member, and now as an instructor. And I think that's an important preface to the panel because obviously we're going to be speaking to women's issues in the classroom, which can maybe come off like we've had kind of a negative experience, when I think the reality of it is that all of us have had a really positive experience here at UVU. And if I didn't have a positive experience, there's no way I could recruit on behalf of the university, right? So I want to make sure you guys know that this is coming from a place of love and recognizing that there's always room for improvement, even at the best schools, even with the most inclusive models. We can always be doing more for accessibilities. So even though I had this really great experience as an adult learner, a full-time worker, and a woman, I was met with resistance and barriers in a lot of different spaces here in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Spaces that I was meant to succeed in with barriers that I feel are very easily removed. And although the issues I faced and currently face as a woman in higher ed existed the entire time I was here, they were further compounded and brought painfully to my attention when I had my son my junior year here. And took on the additional role of parent, student, and a lactating parent at that to a very young child while maintaining a full load and full-time work. So since then, I've become a tireless advocate for women and diverse learners in our classrooms. And in my own classroom, I strive to be aware of these barriers we needlessly face and often accidentally take part in. In my role as a diversity outreach admissions counselor, I am incredibly privileged to be the person in the life of an adult learner, which oftentimes are women and single mothers, that connects them to resources and empowers them along their way to higher education. However, as an admissions counselor, I'm the first person they see on their higher education journey, and we lose most of our female students along the way, not in the beginning. And this concerns me and interests me in how are we going to address these issues of where are we trickling our female students out and what can we do to correct those issues. In my own degree path, and I studied philosophy here, and you'll hear something similar from all the women on this panel, and we all have diverse degrees, that in our 1 and 2,000 level classes, they're roughly 50-50-ish in terms of gender distribution. And that's true nationwide at the university level. And then something happens in our 3 and 4,000 level classes as we creep towards graduation, where we're 1 of 3 to 5 of the same women in every single classroom that we go in. And that was my experience, and that was the experience of a few people here today. And so we're losing them in the midpoint, us, we're losing us. And I'm interested by this. So for example, here in Chess in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, we have a pretty female-dominated distribution in that like 67% of our students currently enrolled are female or female identifying, whereas our graduation rates don't reflect a similar dominance in like female enrollment. In my own graduating class, only 33% of us were women, even though philosophy is usually 50-50 in the beginning. So I'm very interested in this. My son was due in March, which is, dead smack center of the semester. And like I said, it was my junior year. And people would ask me all the time how much time I would be taking off from school. And I think it's noteworthy that they would ask me how much time I was taking off as opposed to am I taking time off from school. And it reflected to me what people felt I should be doing when it came to my education. When I would tell them none, people were floored. I took maternity leave from work because I worked here at the university as well. But I was back in the classroom 10 days after an unplanned C-section. And I was met by a very harsh climate of incredible walking distances that we all do every day that you don't realize how long they are until you've had a C-section. And little to no accommodations in assisting me to get back in the classroom. Somehow at the time all my classes were in like Pope Science, which means there's no parking nearby. And this was a really big hurdle for me. And accessibilities didn't have a lot of resources to help me succeed there. There was nowhere to pump or feed my child. The breastfeeding pods don't have sinks or trash cans and aren't conveniently located to bathrooms for me to do that. There's also always people in them because I am not the only parent student on campus. There are a lot of us and only 5 pods. Train of thought, sorry. And they currently function without sinks and trash cans and being close to a bathroom. They really more so function as a space to hide women as opposed to a space to meaningfully include women. You're preparing food, so you need to wash your hands. I hope you guys know this already. So certainly, though, that isn't to say there was any shortage of individuals, amazing professors like Jeff, chairs of my department, coworkers, and colleagues who reached out to me and attempted to move what seemed like incredible mountains to help me in this goal of not taking any time off from school. But it became painfully clear to me that this was a problem in and of itself. The mountains should have never been there for an individual to remove, or for them to reach out to me to try to move around the structural issue that's going on here for women and for parent students and for a lot of different categories of non-traditional learners. Barriers for women and non-traditional students, for parent students, diverse students, should not be an individual case-by-case thing. The issue is a systemic one that spans higher education at large. It's not unique to UVU by any means. And an education that relies on the kindness and understanding of each individual stranger that you interact with when you walk into a classroom is no system for women or any other minority group to meaningfully flourish in. So my inspiration for this panel today is drawn from my experience as a new mother in a harsh educational climate. But the issues far extend motherhood, so I don't want to sum it up in that. Women are faced with difficulty speaking in the classroom due to gender inequities. Women face incredibly high rates of gendered violence while enrolled in college. Women represent a lower percentage of graduates, and so on and so forth. I could throw a lot of different statistics at you guys, but that's kind of boring. So I want to ask our panel here today and a lot of the audience of where are we losing women and why are we losing women and what can we do about it on the individual level and on the university level. So I'm going to introduce our students that are here today. Everyone here is currently a student on our panel. I will start with, we'll just go down the line. Here I have Elena. She is a junior, a philosophy major. She also works as a student fellow at the Center for the Study of Ethics. And you didn't put this in your bio, but I think it's important that she's a team member of our Ethics Bowl team here at UVU. I'm very passionate about Ethics Bowl, so I wanted to make sure we threw that in there. And then next to her, we have Melissa. And let me find Melissa. Melissa is majoring in English with a minor in philosophy. She's a senior and a single mom to a 2-year-old. She has returned to school after taking a 2-year break. She's also an IA for ethics and values, and she works at a residential treatment center for teenage girls who struggle with PTSD and other emotional and psychiatric disorders. Michelle, just down the line, is studying social work to pursue her lifelong goal of becoming a licensed clinical social worker after a lengthy career co-founding and running a software company while raising her 4 kids. Megan Heyer is a senior studying computer science with an emphasis in full-stack web development. She is the vice president of Girls Who Code and is currently a web development intern at Silicon Slopes. And then last but not least, lovely Devin. She's a senior computer science major with a CS emphasis. She started UVU's chapter of Girls Who Code and is very passionate about closing the gender gap in tech. And those are our speakers today. So I'll have some questions and speaking prompts, and we'll try to do a little bit of Q&A at the end. And we'll just start with, I'll ask all of you just generally if you could speak to your overall experience at UVU, whether you have positive or negative things to say. If you feel inspired to speak, please do. Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Michelle.
This is heavy. I would like to say I have been at UVU in and out since I was 18 years old. So I'm 54 now. When I started at this school, it was called the Tech, if any of you know that. That's how long it's been. And in speaking to why female students are lost, I was having a family, and my husband was the main earner, and his education was looked at as more important than mine. So he earned 2 bachelor's and a master's before I did. And so it was, I need this education to further my career. And it was, culturally looked at as my job to stay home and raise the kids. Although when we started our software company, I was the president and ran the entire operations and was CFO of the company, and it was one of the fastest growing companies in Utah, and recognized in the Inc. 5000. So I played my part in also running the family company, but even then, his education was more important than mine. So it has taken this long for me to come back. But as far as my experience here at UVU, it was a good one when I was able to come. And varied throughout the years. The school changed a lot. Every time I came back, it felt like a different school, and I feel like it has grown quite a bit over all those years.
Anybody else? Maybe? I can speak a little to mine, and I already led with that I had a very positive experience and still do here at UVU, and a bulk of the barriers I faced were when I was trying to pump with a young baby and just do that grind and try to get to classes and do that all in a 15-minute transition. And then if anyone has their children enrolled in the WeCare, it's kind of far away, and there's not a ton of time to park in the craziness that we have here. So a lot of the barriers I felt that I faced were very simple, sort of structural concerns that could be addressed as opposed to like individual interactions I was having. However, I will say, so I was working, before I came to work at UVU, when I first started here, I worked full-time at a truck shop in Salt Lake. It's a very different career. But I was working there during the day, and I was commuting here at night and weekends for classes. And that was, obviously difficult for many reasons. But But one of the things that just so happened at the time that the only things being taught at night were upper division classes, and I was very far from being ready for an upper division course at the time, but I took them anyway, and I had amazing professors to help me flourish. But a lot of the things that I would see in those classes is the one of the 5 women. I was one of 5 women in all of the senior level classes that I took. And despite the fact that they were clearly in many ways better qualified than a lot of the other students who felt empowered to speak up in the room, they didn't, and they wouldn't speak up during the class, and myself included. But I was a freshman, and I was like, I don't know anything. But this is something I saw repeatedly, and I see when I talk to other female students, is this idea of like, I'm not qualified to speak, whereas I don't feel most men have those same concerns in the classroom about whether or not they're qualified to speak. Because the classroom is meant to be, I don't know everything, that's why I'm here. So you don't need to know everything to feel empowered to speak in the room. So from a classroom perspective, I think there's a lot of good work to be done in finding a way to empower women to be as confident in educational spaces as we empower young boys to be confident in educational spaces. And granted, a lot of that probably happens well before we get to college in the young upbringing of children, and it weighs on my mind in raising my own son. But I still think there are things that professors can do, and also just stuff like that to help address some of those concerns. But overall, I managed to graduate on time, and that was certainly not alone in that I had a really wonderful department, and I was very fortunate in that philosophy is a pretty small department, and so my professors knew me, and I knew them, and they took time to really understand me and to help me develop outside interests like extracurriculars. Whereas when I came back to school, I didn't think extracurriculars like Ethics Bowl were going to be something that was available to me as someone who also works full-time. And so in a lot of ways, UVU is an excellent place for me to flourish. And as a recruiter for our school, I see that we're doing a lot more than the other universities are for diverse learners, and that we're the best space that we have in Utah for many people. So juggling some of the positive and the negatives there. But does anybody else want to speak to their overall experience as a student?
So as was mentioned, in our beginning level classes, there was a lot of women, and we are seniors now, and there are very few of us left in the classrooms. Devin and I have had the discussion, though, that this semester, we've actually seen a lot more women around the CS building, which has been really exciting to see, and we're not really sure what the cause of that is, but it's really hopeful. And learning at BYU, especially in such an intimidating field, has been a great opportunity. And I think that there's many of us in this Girls Who Code Club, which is striving to make a comfortable and accepting environment to explore options in tech, because we found that one of the largest barriers for women in coming into computer science is just the fact that it's intimidating. And it seems to be outside of our range, but once people start to realize that if you're creative or you like puzzles or you like math, it applies to almost everybody. And so giving women that space to feel comfortable asking questions and just kind of dipping their toes in has seemed to be a huge way into providing more of a space for women in tech.
And I'll piggyback off of the both of them. The reason that I started the Girls Who Code is an international nonprofit that works to close the gender gap in tech. And you can like start a local chapter. And I wanted to join UVU's, but there wasn't one, so I started it. And the feedback has been mostly really positive. Even like men that we have interacted with at like recruiting events and stuff have been like, oh, this is really cool, like that you guys are doing this. We do need more women in tech. And it is nice to have that. I just think that there's an extra layer of like imposter syndrome when you're a woman in tech. And so we're just trying to show other women that, you know, you do belong. There is a place for you in tech. So
That could maybe lead me into our next speaking prompt, which is a bit directed at our women in STEM, but certainly applies to a couple of other degrees that are here. Experience as women in fields that have historically been dominated by men. And do you feel if that's impacted your ability to succeed or caused you to need to work harder to get where you are? Just things like that.
Well, I am fueled by rage, so the sexist comments have only made me stronger. But computer science actually used to be pretty female dominated back in like the 60s and before then. The first computer scientist, the first programmer, was Lady Ada Lovelace, so it was a woman. And women kind of got pushed out in like the 80s when computers were being marketed to like boys as like toys. And so you would get to college, and if you had never had any experience with that, you were kind of just like pushed out from the courses. And it's led to like a graduation rate of like, what, like 20-something percent?
It's 22%.
22%. So it's gone downhill. It has gone backwards. So yeah, it is difficult, but it's not like, I don't know, I kind of think of it like women were originally really big in computer science, so we can do it again.
Yeah, so I can speak to philosophy in answering this question. I'd say my experience at UVU overall has been really positive, and I credit that mostly to the faculty in humanities in the philosophy department. I've found that their efforts to make me feel welcome and involved, getting involved in things like my current job at the Ethics Center and the Ethics Bowl team have been hugely beneficial. But that philosophy by itself and like the gender ratios in the classroom, I have to admit, every once in a while there is a question of whether or not there's something about being a woman and studying philosophy that makes it more difficult, or if there's something that I that's inherently going to set me off and make me not succeed as much, because everyone you're reading is a man. These are a bunch of old, usually white men who have died a long time ago, and we're still reading their ideas, and they are good ideas. But even then, today, to look around in the classroom and notice that there's definitely fewer women in this space than men, to wonder if there's something about it, just even to question, like, I know, we're equal, all this stuff, but is there something? Why can't I see as many people who look like me or represent me? Yeah.
I'd like to maybe jump on the philosophy train as well, because I have often felt frustrated by this, looking at the syllabus and not seeing anybody like me on it. And certainly you're correct in that these old dead people that we read have great ideas, but I'm sure there are some modern philosophers that have great ideas as well and are women. And in my own classroom, so as a student and now from an instructor level, and it really hasn't even been that long, it's been interesting to me that even when I assign pieces written by women, almost always my students assume that it's a man. And when they write their responses about it, that's like he this, because it's just assumed that it's a man. Even if they have a feminine name, like they just read a piece this week by Val Plumwood, and everybody thought that she was a man. And I found that just an interesting note. And also like justifiable in that, because we do read a lot of men in philosophy, and if you're wanting a career in that path, it can sometimes be discouraging to look at and in philosophy, it's a very academic track. I mean, let's be honest, really the only jobs you can do in that are to teach it or to write in it. And so when you look at a syllabus and you don't see anybody writing that's like you, it does sometimes make you think, like, can I be successful in this industry that has been so male dominated for such a very long time and is currently male dominated? It's not just historically, it's presently.
Yeah, and just an afterthought as I was thinking about it, there's also being able to communicate your ideas clearly and confidently is an important part of philosophy, because so much of it is, it's about explaining, first of all, because with things like ethics, you want people to be able to understand and agree with you so you can make changes in the world. And then also for making arguments, you need to be able to say things in a way that people understand, again, so that they can acknowledge that that the idea is correct. And so where that's a skill that's important in like classroom discussions, but also just in being able to do philosophy, there's usually an aspect of more timid socialization when it comes to how women are expected to speak or kind of taught the skills of speaking. And it's more yeah, it's just uncomfortable or uncertain, like to try and present your ideas, and that you have to unlearn that. And so that can be a problem, because when you come into first trying to learn those skills, and your peers already have the sense that they can just say what's on their mind, and it's more of a comfortable skill for them, then you're less likely to be able to have like your voice heard in the classroom, because there's a competition of what how much time you have for what people are willing to listen to.
I would love to tie into this, because going back to working to be heard or valued as a woman in STEM, I don't have a degree in that field. My position was more in leadership and HR in that field. However, what I got to see over and over again was women being far underpaid for positions that men were holding in that field. One example would be that as a director in a company, after we sold ours, I went in and spent 2 years leveling the salaries of women in the company that were they were grossly underpaid for what men were doing in the same positions. I mean, I had a meeting with the owner of the company and basically embarrassed him. I really did. It was like, I cannot believe that a man who is as lovely as you and has the values that I know that you do would take care of women this way. That's how I started the conversation. And then went through every single person on the payroll and went, this is how you value them. And so we went through a process of making sure that they were paid fairly for the work that they did. But being able to have those conversations, I had my English and some ethics and values courses here at UVU before that happened, and I will say that they were valuable to me and did help me with some of those conversations. And that developing those skills are part of the college experience. The writing skills, being able to build a case for having those conversations, because when I had them, I had them written down. I had written very strong cases, and was able to be eloquent in the way I delivered those things. So as a woman, being able to hold your own and advocate for yourself and speak up for other women, and being able to do that in a way that does not come across as aggressive, as you are often labeled, or as angry, as you are often labeled, that comes with skills that you learn while you are at school. I'm in Jeff's class right now, and being able to have those conversations in a logical way. I do believe that men tend to come towards things in some ways different logical areas. We have a sheet that we're going through right now that's a way of kind of putting a conversation into a very specific format that helps me quite a bit. So it's quite helpful. Anyway.
Thank you. I think I know what format you're referring to. Just a sneaking suspicion that we might have done that before in Ethics Bowl. And I would highly recommend that to anybody in the room. But I think for me, I would agree that Ethics Bowl is probably the main platform where I found my voice and my ability to speak and just script things out in my head in a way that is organized and doesn't just come out as like me ranting. It comes out as, instead of rage, which people don't tend to listen to, even though I'm a big fan of rage, just let it out there. But it helped me sort of collect myself in that way. I'd like to direct my next question to maybe some of the parent students, although it's not exclusively about that. And it doesn't have to be currently, Michelle, like you currently have young children in the home. But so what barriers, if any, do you feel you faced as a parent student? They don't necessarily need to be related to UVU or the classroom experience. And maybe a little bit of prefacing in that I'd like to say that although all parent students face barriers, I think mothers have unique ones, and I think we can all agree in the space that like women have a different sort of burden in society, and then therefore in higher education as well when it comes to being a parent student. And so I think it therefore becomes a woman's issue. But did you want to go first? You want me to go first? What do you think?
Oh, me?
Either of you.
Oh.
Whatever you like.
I pulled the mic, sorry. Well, I think mostly my experience here at UVU has been very positive, and I do think that a lot of that has to do with the philosophy department. I've been fortunate enough to, while becoming pregnant mid-semester in 2019, to be taking classes by professors who are very accommodating, understanding, and kind. I've also been an instructional assistant for Jeff Nielsen while I was pregnant, sitting in the back of the room with my big belly. And, you know, it was very comforting to know that he, you know, before me coming to him with any questions of accommodations, it was very comforting to know that, you know, I was welcomed. I was not out of place in his classroom. I felt very valued and very respected, not only as a human, but as an academic. And so I appreciate that so much because I was made to feel comfortable, and also my intellect was valued as well. So not just that I was allowed to be there and it was understood if I couldn't make a class, but I was very much welcomed and more than welcome to express my ideas as an instructional assistant. So also while being pregnant, working full-time, and beyond working full-time at a treatment center, also working as an instructional assistant. And what I was doing was I was saving up money to be able to have time off after having my baby, because where I was working, the treatment center I was working at the time, I was working full-time hours and overtime, but was told that I could not have a full-time position because the allotted full-time positions were already taken by people that had worked there for close to 10 years or over 10 years. So I was working 40 hours plus, but with no health care, and I did not have any paid time off or any opportunity while I was pregnant or after. And I did also end up just having to quit because me taking time off wasn't acceptable, especially for medical complications during my pregnancy. But so while I did have to, deal with those barriers, I am very fortunate to have professors here, specifically in the philosophy department, that were very kind. I also took my last semester of 4 ancient Greek philosophy, ancient Greek language courses. And while pregnant, I can tell you that that was extremely difficult for anyone that has been pregnant, but if you haven't, I'm sure you can imagine. Physically, my first 2 trimesters, I would frequently leave class to throw up. Or, there were days where I was so sick, and, anyone that deals with any kind of physical health issue can know that can inhibit you from thinking clearly and speaking clearly. But my ancient Greek professor, I had 2, Mike Shaw and Joseph Miller, were extremely kind. And while, they weren't just letting me not turn things in or not come to class, I was given the option, if I was physically unwell that day, to not come and to email, or participate later or come to office hours. So I was still held accountable. I was still doing the work, and I was still, earning the grade that I deserved. But it really was just being accommodating to being physically unwell and not being able to mentally participate. So I'm very fortunate for that. I think that a barrier, though, is
was I just lucky? You know, UVU is a great school, and specifically in the philosophy department, I've had great experiences. But a barrier could be, you know, do we have to rely on professors just being kind and being understanding as people, which I've had, but further, sorry, and I have the brain fog intermittently, I'm sure you can tell. So I'm a single mom of a 2-year-old. But, you know, I do think that there are certain professors, if there aren't already accommodations in place for parents, you know, what if I do have a professor that maybe isn't as sympathetic or maybe doesn't understand what it's like to be a parent, you know what I mean? And where I can rely on kind professors that I understand, you know, what can I fall back on if I have other classes or other professors that maybe don't understand that gray area? You know, is it a disability? Is it not? You know, being sick while you're pregnant, is that a disability? Breastfeeding, you know, it's kind of a gray area, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if you were asking me, I was also quite unwell, and I strongly would feel that pregnancy and young infancy is like a short-term disability, and therefore requires accessibility concerns. I remember similarly in ancient Greek with Mike Shaw, I had the very intense fog and memory issues, and I would regularly turn in the same homework assignment like 3 or 4 times, forgetting that I'd already done it, which is a good, but similarly I would forget that I hadn't done it, and it's a crazy time. It was also during COVID, and I'm sure that further compounded a lot of memory issues because nobody does well in their house all day, every day.
I just have one little thing to add.
Yeah,
to
go
that.
ahead.
So I'm the parent of I have adult children, and I have one at home who is getting ready to graduate from the U with her materials engineering degree. So we have someone in STEM, and she is high functioning autistic, and was not diagnosed until she was in college, which is very common for girls. And so that provides a different experience for me as a parent of, I have a child who is now living at home, but her experience at school is different. She has days that are very difficult for her, where she relies on me in ways that other, adults at school, are very independent and don't need their parents, where she will need me in different ways. And so those present different challenges as me being a non-traditional student in school. And so there will be days where we're both at home doing homework. We both have our deadlines that are very similar. The school schedules are the same. However, I will need to drop everything to help her regulate emotions, or really take a moment to help her deal with social skills issues, or things that can come really hard for her. She's brilliant in every way, and yet some things can be more difficult for her than the average person, and she's just wonderful and done so well through school. But it's a different challenge when you have an adult child with those situations, and so those can weigh heavily when I also have a lot of deadlines of my own and take away. So I don't necessarily, I would say that I don't usually bring those up with my professor. Maybe I don't feel like it's okay to. Maybe I have, I don't know if I ever have with Jeff, but I would say that because they're adult children, maybe that's an extra pressure that I don't ever, maybe I don't feel like it's my place to say, to bring that up.
You're not alone in that. I mean, just before we started this, Melissa and I were talking about how there's sort of this sense of like, when I go into the classroom, I need to not be a parent. And I have to almost take that hat off and put on a different one altogether to be successful in that space, which is a really difficult thing to do, because children, they do have unique needs, and they require you to have your phone out, because what if something happens at daycare, there's some sort of emergency. And so there's this feeling that you have, and I don't think it's like made up, like we've made it up ourselves and we're putting this pressure upon ourselves. There's something out there that's sort of causing us to feel like to be successful in the classroom, we have to take off this hat of mother and come in and be a student. And I felt that along my entire journey of like, I need to take off this hat of like full-time worker and put on my hat of student, and a bunch of different categories of being non-traditional. There's this feeling that you can't be both or all three or four, and you have to assume a different role, and that can be challenging for many reasons. But we're quickly running out of time, so I want to make sure we speak to a couple different things. And this will be directed towards some of the adult learners here. But what barriers, if any, do you feel you face as a non-traditional student? And I'll fully disclose that I hate that term. So it's fully for lack of a better term. But it's just an umbrella word for essentially anyone that isn't fulfilling the recently out of high school, kind of checking those boxes. And then similarly, they don't need to be related to UVU or necessarily the classroom experience. Does anybody want to speak to that? I can go first. I remember when I came here in my mid-20s and they kind of put that cap of adult learner on me, I was like, wow, way to make me feel really geriatric. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. I consider myself a young person, a young college student, and it made me feel different. And I so badly wanted to take off those hats and not be different. And I remember I was working at a truck shop at the time, so I had a very sort of specific get-up, and I would like try to change and like clean myself up in the car before I went to the classroom to try to make myself seem less non-traditional, because nobody wants to feel like they're the exception in the room. And luckily for us at UVU, we usually aren't. We have a very diverse student population here in terms of traditional versus non-traditional, but for some reason we still kind of feel this need to be like, I fit in here, this is a space for me, and I'm just a normal college student like everybody else, and you feel this kind of need to do that, and eventually that got exhausting, and I just went to class in my get up and all my tire grease and crap like that. But those were some of the barriers that I felt was just this kind of intense pressure to not be non-traditional, even though now I readily admit that I'm an adult learner because I feel very empowered by it. But at the time when I was coming back to school, I felt very self-conscious about it. I had already failed college once. I didn't want people to know that I was unique, or why am I doing this later as opposed to before, and things like that. And then I think maybe Michelle might have a couple things to say about those adult learner barriers as well.
Yeah, I mean, first I just thought I wanted to augment something I said earlier, which was it was very much my perception that my husband's education was more important than mine. He never placed that on me, just so to be clear. It was always my perception that he needed that, you know. I could have definitely been better advocating for myself. For me as an adult learner, what I want to say is that I feel very blessed to be here as an adult learner. I had a stroke when I came back in 2012, right after finals, and recovered from that. And I'm very happy to be back here and doing as well as I am. One of the things that I have noticed, because that now puts me in a neurodivergent category, like my daughter is that the thing I find difficult is that I've noticed that a lot of professors don't necessarily teach their courses with that view in mind, and there is a high probability that they have neurodivergent students in their class. And so I find that I'm usually educating them on taking a look at their material and saying, you are missing opportunities to teach people in the class in this way. The other side of that would be that as an older student in the class, I love that I have my life experience to add when we're having discussions, but I also want everyone here who's in the younger category to know that I learned so much from you as well. I do not by any means feel that because I've lived a long life that I don't have anything to learn from what you add. So I always appreciate and wish that people who are younger in the class would speak up more because I get tired of sucking up all the air. And I feel like my hand, maybe I'm braver because I'm older, my hand goes up way more. And I really would encourage you to add to the discussion because we want to hear from you.
Great, thank you. And then if I could direct the next question to Devin and Megan, but just, and I'm going to ask this question to everybody down the row, but do you think there are steps the university could take to mitigate some of the concerns that you guys brought up early on in this? Whether that's like professor specific or just institution wide? But if you just have any sort of ideas. It's okay if you don't, but.
Well, so the professors in the CS department are very, very good. They're very, very helpful, and we've watched them take a lot of steps. You know, you'll be in a class and they'll be like, and you guys, you guys get, all of you get it. And they try to include the women in the room. But there may be now, are there female professors?
There are, up until last semester, there weren't any
Yeah.
female professors.
We've heard that there may be female professors
One
now.
of our club members has a
Yes.
couple, female professors.
The elusive female professor.
Yes, but it is largely male dominated. And additionally, one area that I've found to be a struggle is programming as a whole is a very collaborative work. And so you'll, especially in these later classes, be in a class and they ask you to do, this assignment together in this group. And often that's a time when I felt very isolated, as there was nobody else really like me, and so people kind of grouped with their like people of their common interests, and then mine were inherently different because I'm a female and I have a lot of interests that don't apply to the typical background. And so I think that I'm not sure what the solution is there, but maybe finding a way to integrate all of the students more together within the classroom, within those groups, whether that is assigning them yourself or aiding in how they're selected or the specific roles within those groups, I think would be very beneficial.
Great, thank you. Did you have something to say, Devin?
Yeah.
Please.
So another thing is that I know Megan can relate to this, but I only started programming 3 years ago, and some of the people in our classes have been doing this like for funsies since they were like 8 or 10 years old, and so sometimes the teacher will be like giving a lesson, and someone will. Or they'll talk about something and someone's like, oh yeah, of course, who doesn't know that? And I'm like, me. Like, can you let the teacher teach? Just like there's a lot of terminology and there's a lot of like tech is so broad, so there's like a lot of information. And as someone who just hasn't been absorbing it for that long, you can kind of just feel like you're behind just inherently because you just weren't. I didn't think this would be interesting to me. And I know that's something that a lot of other women in tech can relate to, is that you just didn't think it would be for me. So yeah, that's just kind of like I don't really know what to do about that, but it's kind of a problem.
I love that, so thank you for speaking to that. And then maybe if those are students that are more in the social sciences, if you guys do you have any ideas or steps the university could take to mitigate some of the barriers? I think something Elena and I were speaking to is a more diverse syllabi is a really excellent step, and I think that would apply in most degree paths. And that's something that I really strive for in the classroom, and that I see some people are taking more of an interest in as of late, is this idea of like, one, decolonizing our syllabus is a term that we use a lot in philosophy. And then something similar with the gender gap in the things that we're reading and the people that we're studying, because I think it's a direct reflection to your students what they can expect when they leave here, right? When they get their degree and they're out in the workforce. Did you have something to add in? Elena, perchance?
Yeah, I think something that would be valuable as a change is just a more more accommodating to different ways of speaking or presenting ideas. Along the idea of neurodiversity, there's a lot of reasons why people might speak differently or think differently, but the idea I think that I'm trying to say we should do is to look at more what they're saying rather than how they're saying it, especially in just classroom informal discussion. We might say you can choose to try and learn differently, but if it's just how you are now, to appreciate, being able to have that teaching, that education still be there, regardless of those differences.
Thank you. And then, does Melissa or Michelle have anything to add in before I move on?
Can you help me out? Was this, I just want a refresher, was this what can UVU do
Yeah.
to help?
Whether that's like on an individual level or a policy level, however you interpret that question.
I think maybe just recognizing that childcare and like a barrier to finishing my education would be being a single mom to a toddler. And we talked about, feeling like when you're in school, like it's almost like I don't want to mention that I'm a mom. I'm here. I take this seriously. I promise. You know what I mean? Right now, I'm a student. I'm an academic, not a mom. But to be honest, yeah, we do need our phone out sometimes. There may be an emergency. And just, I think that there's this gray area that I mentioned before about, what constitutes an emergency. You know what I mean? If I can't make it to class, I think a lot of upper level classes understandably have an attendance policies where if you're absent more than 3 times, you fail. And I understand the purpose for that. I really do, because it is critical that we, take the class seriously and that we participate. But, there are things that do come up being a parent, whether you're a single parent or not, you know what I mean? And is it an emergency if I, at the last minute, can't be in class because I have to take my child to the doctor? But no one died. But I still think that, those conversations and having that in mind, that that's a barrier to graduation, and that I take, my education seriously enough to be here. But there may be, more than 3 days that I'm unable to attend, although I'm still, doing my coursework.
And maybe along the lines, the parent-student sort of track is, and it's not necessarily like a university fault, although I'm a firm believer that universities are meant to function as bastions in our community, and so we can set the tone for what we want to see in society by doing that here at the institutional level. And so one of the things that was interesting to me becoming a mother was this idea that I almost had to choose. So sure, a lot of my professors were very understanding that, and a lot of times when you have young children or just children in general, they come first. But I've always kind of wondered, but why would I need to pick? Like, why is there a top priority as opposed to these are my priorities? And my priorities consist of motherhood and work and being a student and working in academia. And so a bit of a societal shift there. And I felt, and I like to tell this story, but it just so happened that in one of my classes, with the professor I'd taken classes with many times, there was a gentleman whose spouse was due almost to the day, the same time as I was. And people would never talk to him the way that they would talk to me about having a child coming. And so there's something that we can do as peers as well to not sort of view women and mothers as this sort of uniquely exceptional parental role in terms of the academic setting and workplace setting. And I would find it so frustrating. I would come home and complain about it, and I would complain to this professor about it, who's also a dear friend of mine. And I would just be like, why don't people ask him how much time he's going to take off of school? And why don't people ask him if he's going to postpone graduation? And it would make me so mad, and I would rage about it. And I think the way that you phrase things is very important, because you're signaling to people what you think about them. When people would ask me, how much time are you taking off? That told me that they think I should be taking time off, and that staying in school and having a baby at the same time is neglectful in a sense, and not prioritizing having a baby or not prioritizing my education. And so I think those are some just important things of the way that you say things, even well-intentioned. And I said in the beginning that we all sort of accidentally participate in the system that oppresses women in higher education. And so by no means did anybody mean that question maliciously to me. But it signaled to me what they kind of felt and what society felt about me trying to juggle these different hats that I was wearing as a woman and a mother and a student. And so, yeah, I think that would be a big one for me, is maybe think again how you phrase something, because it's a reflection of how we all feel about women. And then I'd also just quickly like to open the floor to different stories from the classroom. This is about like our classroom experiences. And if we don't have anything that we want to say, that's totally fine too. And I have a story if nobody else does, but just generally, it could be anything. I think I had put in the email, but does anybody have any like specific classroom experience that has weighed on their mind? And if not, we'll move to a Q&A briefly.
So my experience is actually a positive one.
Good.
But going back to the things that are said to you, I'll have a lot of conversations where people ask what you're studying and you tell them it's computer science. They say, oh, that's a great field. Plus you're a woman, so you'll have no problem getting a job. And that indicates, you know, that I'm going to get a job because of my gender and not because of my skills. And so that's something that like kind of starts to get to you the more you hear it. And you wonder if you actually, why you should be in this field and trying to enter the workforce with it. But I specifically, my beginning of my junior year, had one professor who just kind of out of nowhere pulled me aside and he just said, hey, I want you to know that you're too good to not be in the field. And I come back to that all the time because, you know, if he has been in industry and he thinks so, then, you know, there's something to my skills that indicates that I should be there too. And so that's just a very positive one that I would like to share.
I love that. Anybody else have any final thoughts or stories?
Yeah, I just really want to express my gratitude to the professors that I have experience with in the philosophy department, because I do think that they're so focused on us as people with needs. And that experience reminded me of the encouragement that I've gotten specifically from Mike Shaw and Shannon Mussett, who have continually, you know, encouraged me to keep going when it really is a sacrifice to be here. And you do have, you know, that doubt whether I should be here or I should be at home, you know, being a mother. It's that kind of double consciousness of you have to be one or the other. So I am really thankful that I am at a university where I do feel encouraged and valued as a person instead of just a student, but also encouraged to continue academically and like noticed for your skills as well.
Thank you. And in wrapping up, I would just like to thank everybody here. I know a lot of you had to work around course schedules, childcare schedules, and work schedules to be here with not very much notice on my part, and I apologize for that. And I'm very grateful for the sacrifices that you made to be here to help me. Most of you are a stranger to me, so you just did this essentially out of the goodness of your heart and your love for higher education and your passion for women in your industries, and I think that's really noteworthy. And I also would like to thank Brian and Jeff and everyone in the Ethics Center again for allowing me to rage about women in higher education for a minute. And then also just to thank you guys for coming and listening. Does anybody have any questions for anybody on the panel? I would.
Thank you. So I have a question. Just like I like what you talked about at the beginning about like sort of women's voices in the classroom. Well, I guess that's sort of the title. But like just being able to speak. And I'm wondering, so I'm like in a sort of upper division computer science class. And like you said, there are like 4 women in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, what can I do like as a man to sort of make more space for their voices? Because like, you know, I get excited. I like to talk. So like what role can I play to like consciously help?
Yeah. I love that question, but does someone else have something to say before I chime in?
If you see sexism, call it out. Like straight up, because some men will listen to other men more than they will listen to women, unfortunately. So you can really play a part there as an ally and call it out if you see it. And it makes the space safer for women.
Yeah, I love that. Like you said, you are sort of embodying a little bit of privilege in the classroom, and you're already kind of on the right track in acknowledging that you have that space in the room. But being an ally is really useful in this category and in most categories, because, yeah, men do tend to listen to men. Not to, like, throw shame on half the population. But it's important to note that, and also just to be acknowledge that in a space. And it's easy to tell, I think, when someone has something to say, even if they're not raising their hand. And people kind of have a different body language when they're about to speak, and we know that it's going to happen. And professors and students alike can take steps to try to, if you see that, you know, a woman is wanting to speak, but maybe like the men just keep sort of shooting their hands up faster than they can shoot their hand up, then I think it's perfectly acceptable to just be like, you know, Melissa, do you have something you want to say? Like, if you've been trying to speak. And I know I try to do it in the classroom, where I just ask them directly before I'll ask the other ones who have been talking a lot, which is just good practice for anybody that's kind of quiet in a classroom, is to just try to empower them in that way and pay attention to body language. And everyone in the space can do that, not just teachers.
I'll add on to that another great one. Nothing's better than when another man will speak up and say, you just interrupted Michelle, back to your point you were just saying, and then specifically repeat what I was saying. Wow, that's chivalry.
Okay, any other questions for the panel? Yeah, back here.
So I have a question kind of building off of that, because I think it's a lot more easy and a little bit more comfortable to call out that kind of sexism you're talking about when it's very blatant. Something that I haven't figured out what to do is things like, if you feel like a dude is way more likely to listen to other guys than a girl, like, how do you call something out like that has like plausible deniability on their end without feeling like you're just causing problems? Or address it without even being combative, I guess, too.
Just really nicely ask him to explain what he means, like innocently. Be like, what do you mean? Make him explain his bad ideas. So
I like that. Thank you.
That's such a good answer, and I do that all the time. And a lot of times when you just have someone repeat themselves, they realize what they've said is pretty awful, and they'll like change it. And so then you can tell, like, if it was sexism or something else, is if they feel a need to change it the second time, they probably are hearing what they said. But yeah.
I'm a fan of, did you mean for that thought bubble to leave your head?
I have something to say. Also, you know, if you're in the classroom and you see that, well, anyone, but specifically if there's a woman who continues to try to raise their hand, or they're not called on, or they are interrupted, you know, just speaking up and saying, oh, I want to hear the rest of your thought. Or were you saying something? And like showing that that is an important part of the conversation. Unfortunately, I have had a pretty negative experience in class, but it was actually a visiting professor from a different university and it was a very small class, and I continually raised my hand and he would not make eye contact with me. I would raise my hand first and I wouldn't be called on. I would speak directly to him and he wouldn't respond, and I would make comments and he wouldn't acknowledge them. And so I luckily had a professor here that works here that noticed that, picked up on it, and would say, you know, thank you for what you had to say. Do you have anything more to say? And he would kind of shift and make sure that my voice was heard in that class.
Yeah, please.
So Megan or Devin, I'm also a girl in the computer science department, and you're in a position of leadership. So I was wondering if you had any challenges placed upon you as a woman in surrounded by men, or like any expectations that they place upon you that you don't think are right or justified.
I know that we have gotten comments at some of like the Club Rush events where we're like recruiting and stuff, where guys are like, "Oh, you guys are in computer science. What's your major?" And we're both like computer science, and they're like, "Oh, well, what year?" And we're like, "We're both seniors." And then they're just like kind of stumped because I feel like they look at us and we don't look like what you imagine a computer programmer would look like, and so they just completely like. They just think that we're faking. I don't really know. So that's been kind of weird, but.
Are you saying like specifically due to being in leadership within computer science?
Yeah, do you think that being in the spotlight makes a difference than if you were quiet in class and sort of flying under the radar?
I've honestly found that's given me a lot more of a voice than before. You'll have certain professors that ask you directly about if you're still doing this club, what events are you doing, what projects are you working on, and sometimes you're like sitting in the middle of class, and so you have to share these things with like everybody that's listening. And I think that a lot of the times, a lot of your classmates mean well, like they're not purposely doing these things, and I think providing the opportunity to see like, oh, they're doing this thing that's really cool, like they're actually working on this project, or hearing your ideas and what you have to say, I think sometimes they just don't notice it. And so being in the club and going to Club Rush and doing things like this and different opportunities there, I think has just specifically helped me find a voice to share those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I just feel like, kind of like what Megan said, putting ourselves out there has just, I just don't really think a lot of people like considered that there would be like a female programming based club, and so they're kind of just like, I don't know, confused by it. But like we're not like a super like hardcore club or anything. We're open to anyone regardless of experience level, because we're trying to just introduce more women to tech. And so I think that maybe they think that it is just like a little like funsy club, and it is, but it's also like academic, so.
Any other final thoughts or questions? We're a little over time, but there's nobody after this.
I did want to say for any of the, and I mean, I guess the men can have it too, but for any of the women that are here, my daughter's an executive recruiter for Nike, and she actually negotiates salaries between $350,000 and $1 million. So she's like, her specialty is getting fair wages for women. And she had a conversation with me. I made a little handout for women if they want it that helps them learn how to advocate for themselves and negotiate a fair wage. And so I thought you might be interested in having that moving forward in your careers. It doesn't matter if you're in the STEM field like she is, but I thought that might be something you would like to leave with today. So please approach if you would like one.
And then maybe just encourage people, if you feel interested in this topic, there's a lot of interesting data. So UVU has an entire presentation put together about like women that work for the university. So we have like over 6,000 employees here that are majority women, but our leadership positions are majority men. And so they have a whole sort of foundations of inclusion workshop about women working in higher education, specifically at UVU. That's really interesting. And you can find a lot of data and statistics about graduation rates at our university, and most public universities have to publish that information. So there's a lot of good things just to, I think, to know on the Googles. But yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody.
Yeah, I want one of those.
She worked for several.